Stop whatever you're doing and listen to this. I promise you won't regret it. Because I want to talk about the most mind-bending, unproduced sci-fi script ever made. It had backers in David Fincher and Steven Soderbergh, and was written by this guy, Shane Carruth, who made the mind-bending time travel Sundance hit Primer, and the ethereal, mysterious Upstream Color. But a Topiary is the real masterpiece and the total culmination of all of his strengths. I'm going to be using original concept work to describe the film because if I don't, it will literally be impossible for me to articulate what it's about. So what is a Topiary? Well, the pitch is that it's kind of like a dark Stranger Things, mixed with early Spielberg, Transformers weirdly enough, The Iron Giant, all wrapped in a kind of otherworldliness that's captured in something like Roadside Picnic, or even H.P. Lovecraft. And the film is very strangely structured. The first half has to deal with adults in the 80s chasing a mystery, and the second half is like the Spielbergian kid adventure story. And it starts with one of my favorite notes to the reader ever, which is that it says that there are objects in this film that there are no real-world analog to, which as you'll see makes complete sense. So the film starts in the 80s with a car accident, which triggers an investigation by our first main character, Acre Stowe, who's tasked by the city to find the ideal location for like a rescue reconnaissance center. And because of that, he pours through the data of like traffic accidents in the area to find the nexus or the center point of it. He crunches the numbers and eventually figures it out. But this doesn't satisfy his bosses, who want a more desirable piece of land. So he's asked to basically cook the books and make up numbers to find a different spot. He crunches the numbers with the fake data, and weirdly he finds that the result is the exact same intersection. This is repeated over and over with complete junk data, and every single time it points to the same spot, which he becomes completely obsessed with. He changes jobs just to observe the intersection, starts counting pedestrians and drawing circles at the exact intersection. And this is what sets the plot in motion. A helicopter passes overhead, and sunlight reflecting off the helicopter and a building create what's called a glint, which is described like if you look at the sun and close your eyes, you kind of still see the imprint of the sun. Except this is different because it seems to have longer and shorter kind of tendrils. And so Acre draws the glint and follows the longer tendril. After a few feet, he sees another glint with a slightly different tendril that he maps out and follows again, rinse and repeat. During this time, he gets back together with an old girlfriend whose friend decides to help him out in this obsession. And they really go nowhere until one day, they accidentally stumble upon another group of adults who seem to have been doing, for far longer, pursuing the same mystery that they're doing themselves. People are collecting scraps and recording sounds, etc., mixing specific liquids, doing all sorts of weird things. And it's discovered that in the data they're collecting is the kind of frequencies that corroborate with a specific chemical mixture, and that this mixture is photosynthetic. So they build a pinhole photo machine. The ultimate purpose still a complete mystery. And they travel the world pointing this device at certain star formations, which seems to pinprint in the chemicals that they developed and calcify in a form of amber, which create sheets that have unknown purpose that they kind of stack one on top of each other. But just as we're about to kind of figure out, I guess, what this is all for, the film completely shifts focus. And we jump to the meat of the story, which is about 12-year-olds about a decade or so later. These Spielbergian 12-year-olds are all boys and mostly hang out in kind of an abandoned quarry. And the plot is set in motion because one of the boys, Euclid, the main character, brings home this black box. At first they don't know what to do with it, but it eventually becomes clear that when you flick a switch, the box produces these bizarre discs. And they call the box the Maker. And kids being kids, they just start producing these discs, throwing them at each other, making necklaces. You know, boys will be boys. But it isn't long until they discover that over about a day or so, the discs depuff like a biscuit in an oven and create these kind of funnels. They grow, so to speak. And after producing dozens of these funnels and arguing over them, they realize that certain arrangements, the funnels lock into a stack. And unlike Legos, they're kind of locked in magnetically, a little gap in between that is unbreakable. Once they're stacked, they're locked in. And they have a little fun making these stacks, but kind of grow bored quickly. Until the maker produces a amber-colored disc. And the owner of the disc seems to have a psychic connection to the stacks, being able to manipulate it. Principally in that, in certain motions, it can collapse the stack. And joyfully, when that motion is reversed, it launches the stack in the air like kind of a toy rocket, from which they have tons of fun doing it over and over again. But the stacks can only be launched for so long, and eventually they kind of get a discoloration and that makes it useless. But instead of discarding it, Euclid investigates it and discovers that there's like a spine to these amber resin type funnels. Chipping away at these funnels, he discovers that there are hardened objects within them. These objects he calls petals. And after more investigation, he realizes these petals also fit together seamlessly, which he calls flowers. Which leads to the next major discovery, is that these flowers, when stacked on top of each other, fit together seamlessly, forming limbs. The limbs can spin and collapse. It's very mysterious about what their actual purpose is. That is until they discover that in certain arrangements of the petals, they can form knee joints. And this unlocks the whole thing. They attach these knee joint leg-like things to a crate box. And they discover that the crate box kind of walks around bizarrely, kind of just in circles, but walks nonetheless. And after showing the now called chorus a horse, they learn that the limbs actually learn from observation. And so the whole thing starts behaving automatically like a horse. Naturally, they ride it, they play with it, and most importantly, they want to keep this secret from their parents, so they build a pen to store it in their little playground. But of course, them being 12 years old, it breaks free and they can't find it. And eventually when they do find it, they realize that it has been pounding the ground near a tree over and over and over again. And from that indent in the earth where it's pounding, a coral-like structure is formed. Breaking open the coral-like structure, they find a couple of new objects. The objects from the coral structure are these kind of six-figured gloves and also corresponding plates. The gloves seem to have some control over the choruses, but because they're six figures, they don't quite work. And so one day, one of the boys, with great force, breaks the sixth finger to try to better fit his hand. But in doing so, it produces such a force when broken that he becomes permanently deaf, and the rest of the group has to learn sign language to communicate with him. But now he can freely control the choruses, which because of the plates now don't need their crate to operate. They're now fully formed out of their own materials. But they notice that the choruses are kind of building something. These little stacks, these plumes, so to speak. And the only behavior that they notice is that nothing's really able to live inside of them. That it seems to kind of generate wind gusts both in and out. And most importantly, if any of these holes are plugged, it creates a kind of mini implosion. Which brings us to our climax, in which when the kids build the choruses are attacked by what can only be described as ape choruses. That resemble monkeys but aren't complete like the kids' choruses. They have some sort of human-made elements at the core. And most importantly, they don't seem to be building plumes. And the kids soon discover that the ape choruses are controlled by a kind of camping nomadic group of deaf adults, which is never confirmed, but context clues point us to that this is probably some sort of offshoot from the adults in the beginning. And the adults and children fight with the choruses over who gets to control them. It's unclear the adults' motivations, but the kids' motivation is just to keep their toy. And it gets pretty ruthless pretty fast. There's a lot of unalivings, and these creatures seem to be completely outside of the ability to control, really, from both the adults and kids. And this culminates in an ambush from which the kids stuff limbs into these huge plume networks that the choruses have built underground. And much like the mini implosions earlier, this creates a massive Akira-style black hole implosion of about a couple of kilometers, completely obliterating not just the entire adult group, but also the land and earth below it itself, anything encapsulated within this plume. From this point, we're brought a couple years into the future in which the kids roam a mountainside nomadically on a dragon-style massive chorus that is continuously building these plumes up the mountainside anywhere it can. It's unstoppable. Euclid, our hero, somehow crushes and digests part of a flower petal and has a psychic vision that concludes the story. And the psychic vision is that he sees the entire universe, complete galaxies, planets, land, all consumed by the plumes, consuming life, destroying ecosystems, and emptying the universe of all existence. It expands outward and outward until we finally rest on a pulsar, rhythmically displaying a sort of binary and primary form of information. leading the audience to understand that these plumes, this material, is kind of deeply embedded in the fabric of reality itself, a kind of ontological Lovecraftian virus.